The helicopter pilot pulls the trigger, unleashing a deluge of lead from the mounted minigun. The target is Daredevil, but the pilot doesn't care who else might get hurt. Dodging the onslaught, Daredevil picks up a weapon that has already killed dozens that day and takes aim. He fires. The helicopter explodes, instantly killing the pilot inside. Daredevil asks for forgiveness. It's dark, it's unforgiving, it's Frank Miller gritty. It is of course Daredevil Born Again. Miller teamed up with the incredible David Mazzuchelli in 1986 to create one of, if not the greatest ever Daredevil story. Winning over readers and critics alike, it is widely acclaimed. Today I wanted to look at what makes it such a great Daredevil story and an interesting part of the Marvel world. Daredevil is generally perceived as the Marvel character and series who's had the best writers. It takes a special story then to stand out amongst them, but Miller and Mazzuchelli achieved that here. Looking back now, both are at very different stages of their careers. It's long before Miller's descent into madness. This is the year that The Dark Knight Returns is published, turning an already popular writer into a legendary one. Mazzuchelli is a long way off finding his style that we'd recognise today or completing his magnum opus. This is a plug to check out my Asterios Polyp video. This was when he was doing his more traditional comic book style, which by no means is rough or unrefined. It looks incredible. Paired up with the seasoned and loved Daredevil writer, they made something truly special. We're going to be looking at the graphic novel collected issues, so that's Daredevil 226 to 233. The story has a familiar trope of the villain tearing down the hero, but the way it is executed here, it feels like it was the first time this had happened. The downfall of Daredevil starts with Karen Page, the former secretary to Nelson and Murdoch, and Matt's ex-girlfriend. Karen had fallen on hard times and the actress had become addicted to heroin and susceptible to abuse. Like other addicts, Karen is willing to do anything for the drug and gives up Daredevil's secret identity in exchange for cash. This information makes its way to Kingpin, the feared crime lord and longtime foe of Daredevil. With this information, Kingpin destroys Matt's life. It's here that I think Miller really gets the story right, firstly for not just having a henchman try and kill Matt or those around him, but really having Kingpin take his time to ruin him. Fisk gets Matt's accounts frozen, bribes a cop to testify against Matt, and gets a bank to foreclose on his apartment. Kingpin keeps tabs on Matt's deterioration by having lackeys follow him. He notes that as Daredevil, Matt is getting more and more violent with criminals. Things could have been a lot worse for Matt had Foggy not defended him in court and saved him from prison. Even that friendship though seemed gone as Foggy starts dating Gloriana, who had recently broken up with Matt. Kingpin's efforts are creating an increasingly paranoid Murdoch who thinks that everyone is conspiring against him. There's this one scene which sticks out to me and I think it fully represents Miller's Fisk. A lackey speaks out with a suggestion, nothing outlandish or aggressive. Kingpin calmly orders his legs to be broken. He is meticulous, he is specific, and he is violent. One thing he is not, however, is overly patient. Kingpin is a man with an incredible amount of wealth, power and influence. When things do not go his way, frustrations can show. Fisk's original plan was to see Matt in prison, to have the crime fighter both on the streets and in the courtroom. Locked away with other criminals would have been a delicious outcome for Fisk. The fact it would have been an environment where Fisk could have disposed of him at a whim was a bonus. When that plan was thwarted by Foggy, Kingpin upped the ante. He firebombs Matt's apartment. He doesn't use some harebrained death ray or scheme. Fisk straight up uses some cartel level terrorism in the heart of the city. This aggression and little regard for anyone else in New York will come up again later in the story, but it leaves you genuinely worried about what Kingpin is capable of, which is exactly what a good story should be doing. There is a solid argument to make about this being a Kingpin story as much as a Daredevil one. Back to the story though, this firebombing makes Matt realise that Fisk is behind it all. Matt is left homeless and his mental state starts to deteriorate. He gets more aggressive and paranoid. Matt makes the decision to confront Kingpin directly and except he doesn't. He never reaches the door to leave his rundown hotel room. He never even makes it out of bed. He becomes increasingly delusional, thinking Foggy is conspiring against him and even violently attacking a hotel manager, thinking he was sent by Fisk. An altercation on the subway sees him take out some criminals, but also knock out a police officer. None of this is as Daredevil, but as Matt Murdock. Miller does a fantastic job of demonstrating how debilitating a mental health crisis can be. It leaves Matt paralysed, delusional and irrational, making him a shell of the man he once was. Mazzuchelli needs a lot of the credit here too, as his artwork brings that distress to life, the fear and frustration visible in every panel. Angry, at his wit's end and with no plan, Matt just straight up walks into Fisk's tower and attacks Kingpin. With a righteous rage, Matt gets absolutely annihilated, with Fisk battering him. Matt's unconscious body is covered in booze and then thrown into a taxicab before being pushed into the river. Kingpin does this knowing that Matt's tarnished image will make it look like an unfortunate accident. Matt manages to regain consciousness and save himself at the last moment. He stumbles to his dad's old gym before being discovered by a nun who then takes care of him. That nun turns out to be none other than Maggie, Matt's mother. She nurses him back to health, denying that she is his mother, but Matt's hearing detects the change in her heartbeat's rhythm, giving away her lie. Here is a good place to point out the excellent full-page panels by Mazzuchelli for each of the main 5 issues. First 3 feature Matt lying down in increasingly more painful poses. He curls up further until his knees reach his chest. In the 4th, Matt lies on the bed in a Christ-like pose. In the 5th, he has risen, standing tall, gloves on and ready to fight. Ignoring the boxing at the end, this is very strong Christian connotations. Fear not if you've watched my Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth video. I'm not going to claim that Daredevil is Jesus here. However, the resurrection of Matt, coming back from what he describes as his death at the hands of Kingpin, has similarities to the resurrection of Christ. And didn't Santa stab Daredevil? Maybe Miller was making a point about consumerism taking away the original, religious meaning of Christmas. Probably not though. There are other links to Christianity though. The titles of the issues are all words or phrases with strong connotations to Christianity. Purgatory, Apocalypse, Pariah, Born Again, Saved, Armageddon. These titles outline the path of demise and redemption that Matt follows. Matt's Catholic faith is one of the pillars that his character is based around. In this story, Matt reaches the bottom, losing his home, job, friends and standing within the community. To then be rescued and nursed by nuns must have been an incredibly inspiring time for a religious man. For that nun to then be his mother, it would be hard pressed to see how Daredevil could not have seen this as a sign from God, his faith rewarded. I don't think that Miller is some sort of genius for including this religious aspect to the series, as it's been done with Daredevil before. However, it's such a fundamental part of Matt's character and Miller handled it so well, building the story around the resurrection arc. Even then, of course, Miller was well acquainted with Daredevil, as this was a return to the series for him, having previously penned a legendary run on the character. Obviously though, the story doesn't end here. There is a lot to be resolved, but how will Matt be since his resurrection? He won't be a Christ-like figure who turns the other cheek, oh no. This Daredevil is an avenging angel, but one with patience, something he lacked earlier in the story when he rushed to face Kingpin. With the taxi discovered but no body found, Fisk knows that Matt survived. He is still intent on having Matt killed and uses hired assassins and thugs to try and draw him out. Matt faces a would-be killer of Foggy dressed up as Daredevil. This hired killer had just been released from an asylum. Matt defeats the doppelganger, an analogy of him overcoming his own poor mental state, which almost destroyed him earlier in the story. He strips the fake of the costume, his original having been lost in the apartment explosion. What is interesting though is how Matt at this point has not donned the Daredevil costume since the apartment exploded. He does not put it on again until a new threat appears. Kingpin had been quietly working in the background, pulling strings with high-ranking officials in the military to get a contract with Nuke, a US super soldier. This super soldier is quite different from Steve Rogers though, despite being a part of the Weapon Plus program and with similar capabilities, demonstrating a warped sense of patriotism, armed to the teeth and constantly chewing pills. This is the man Kingpin uses for his next plan. Kingpin orders Nuke to drop in via helicopter and indiscriminately attack New York, all to get a response from Daredevil. Nuke's gun, Betsy, keeps score as he kills dozens of Americans. This is the moment that Matt dons the Daredevil costume again. Even in the midst of all this chaos, Ben Urich corrects himself. It's not Matt in front of him, it's Daredevil, the man without fear. Daredevil takes the fight to Nuke, but Nuke's enhanced physique is difficult for Daredevil to manage, his usual moves ineffective. In an epic struggle, he does eventually manage to weaken Nuke by kicking him into power lines before dropping from a height into him, slamming Nuke through a car and setting it ablaze. Daredevil breaks Nuke's gun, Betsy, on his face, dazing him. As we saw earlier, in an effort to save further lives, Daredevil shoots down the helicopter. Taking a life is something he said earlier in this story he would never do, but this is a man pushed to the limit and in a desperate situation to protect his city. The death toll stands in the hundreds. As he seeks answers from the barely conscious Nuke, the Avengers show up. I think this is one of the best bits in the whole story. Captain America arrives with a voice that could command a god, followed by Thor and Iron Man. How they are shown here is important. Thor is a silhouette and Iron Man a masked sentinel. Surrounded by fire and lightning, they appear incredibly powerful, but cold too, something you could be afraid of. This must be how other people see them. This isn't the arrival of allies or friends, this is the most powerful team on the planet, coming to take Nuke away from Daredevil. And as Iron Man's raised palm and voiced threat showed, they would take him by force if necessary. Daredevil relinquishes Nuke, even though he could prove that Kingpin was involved. In the aftermath of the attack, the church and nuns who treated Matt now focus on those injured during Nuke's onslaught, among them Glory and Karen. I've deliberately neglected going into detail about those characters and other members of the supporting cast, mainly to keep the video shorter. However, now is a good moment to talk about them, as there are so many interesting side stories that link in so well to the main one. Firstly, Glory and Foggy falling for each other is really heartwarming. Despite the part this has to play in Matt's mental state, you can't help but root for them. Matt's story undoubtedly has an effect on them too. You can see this with the anxiety they have waiting for him to call, not sure if he will or if they will recognise the Matt on the other end. Ben Urich's story involves him investigating the links between Matt, the police officer who took the stand against him, and Kingpin, one of Fisk's associates, Nurse Lois, who is an incredible villain, terrorises Urich in an attempt to halt his investigation. With bones broken by the nurse and having listened to the murder of the cop, Ben is broken, terrified of what Fisk will do to him. Despite an attempt on his life and that of his wife, Urich recovers, finding the courage to continue his investigation to help clear Matt. That fear affects him deeply though, as he even bludgeons a man to death who had tried to kill him. His is a dark story. Karen has probably the darkest story though of all. Her addiction to heroin is what starts this whole mess, causing her to sell Matt's secret. Her vulnerability sees her taken advantage of, particularly physically, in her journey back to New York. Along the way, she is hounded by Fisk's men, who are trying to kill anyone else with knowledge of Matt's alter ego. She survives all of this to be reunited with Matt, the man she betrayed, and he forgives her. You can find elements of rebirth within a lot of the main cast, but other than Matt, it lies strongest with Karen. In the stranglehold of addiction, she is nothing like her former self. Karen, for all intents and purposes, is gone. There is a scene where she tries to escape her abuser, only to accept her inevitable death if she can get that one last hit. Truly, she has given up on life. Her resurrection occurs when Daredevil rescues her. Matt's strength and support gets her through her withdrawal and addiction. He revives her. Matt is able to do this and forgive not only because of their past relationship or for being a good Catholic, but because of his own recent trauma. His own dalliance with madness gives him empathy to what Karen might be going through. Their stories mirror each other's. Back to the main story though, there's a prologue to it all. Captain America is disturbed by what he witnessed with Nuke, particularly as Nuke wears the American flag on his face, and he goes looking for answers. He discovers that Nuke was the survivor of a super soldier program, based on the one that created him, Project Rebirth. If there was one character to really fit into the Born Again narrative, it is Cap. He obviously was essentially born again after going through Project Rebirth, but also when he was revived after being thawed from ice into a strange future. As Cap does a little light treason breaking into some secret files, Nuke, held in the same SHIELD building at the time, cracks. After being told his antics in New York will see him moved abroad, he breaks free of his constraints and attacks the soldiers around him. Hearing the alarms, Captain America rushes to confront and subdue Nuke. At the same time, a general, taking orders from Kingpin, gathers helicopters to take out Nuke, scared that he will give Kingpin up. The helicopters fire at Nuke and Cap on the rooftop. Daredevil arrives to get Nuke out of there, but not before the super soldier gets shot. Daredevil doesn't make it to a hospital in time before Nuke dies in the back of a borrowed taxi. Instead, Daredevil changes course and drops Nuke's body in front of Urich at the Daily Bugle. The resulting story published in the Bugle sees Kingpin hurt badly. His name is dragged through the mud, he loses legitimate business ventures, and his lawyers are worked hard keeping him away from prison. Even his underlings display disaffection. He plans revenge. The last page and panel is reserved for a happy Matt and Karen walking in an embrace. It is quite the turnaround from the Matt we saw in the first issue, one who is incredibly self-centered, angry and dishing out blame to those around him. Interestingly, he was even considering his own mortality. He becomes increasingly detached from those he called friends and associates, ignoring Glory and laughing at Ben. Miller has Ben describe Matt's voice as an echo, like it wasn't the original self, almost an imitation. I've spoken about how Karen as well had that sense of no longer being herself, but they are both born again, finding one another. Kingpin's story is almost reversed to this. Before the very end, he is plagued by the name Matt Murdock, experiencing some of the paranoia that Matt was able to feel at the height of his own mental health crisis. The damage done to his empire in the end is akin, although not as extreme, to the losses Matt was made to experience too. So, is it the best Daredevil story ever? Recency bias tells me yes it is. Of course this is personal, so feel free to add your own thoughts in the comments. But Miller's gritty sense of realism is perfect for a Daredevil story in my opinion. It makes the impact of Nuke at the end even more shocking as the escalation hits a fever pitch. That realism also works with the breaking of Matt's sanity, only for it to be restored by faith and family, not through arcane magic or some serum. It makes the resurrection feel earned. As mentioned earlier, there are other great stories going on, as Miller fleshes out the characters, giving them agency and not just having them as decoration to Daredevil's story. There are loads of great additional characters created like Nurse Lois and Nuke, but also the Whites, talking henchmen and a ton of other characters in the background. Each character is unique and adds their own flavour to the story, and that's why it's great to reread this story because you pick up little extra bits. Mazzuchelli, of course, brings all of this to light, illuminating the blossoming romance of Glory and Foggy and cranking up the adrenaline in the fight scenes. His depictions of the low points of Matt, Ben and Karen are equally memorable. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and where do you see it on the list of all-time great Daredevil stories.